Cheers, thanks everyone for joining us. How are things in Renfrew, St Anthony? It looks like the sun's shining there.
Yeah, it's nice and bright this morning, which I'm happy to say. Hopefully it's an omen that it's going to be a good weekend all round, and things will get rounded off tomorrow at Hampden.
Sun always shines on a cup final winning day. What's it like in Bratislava, Anthony?
It's pretty grey, grim. Yeah, I looked at a 10-day forecast the other day. It was the exact same for 10 days. 2 degrees, cloudy skies.
Do you know, I used to think Scotland was the blandest country in the world. It's never too hot, never too cold, never too wet. But you might have found somewhere that's equally bland.
Yeah. Certainly at this time of year, yeah.
Anyway, we've got the cup final weekend this weekend. So Celtic have been in, 58 cup finals and 139, lead the league table by quite some distance. Well, I don't think we'll ever be caught because the team who are in second place, they died. Next after them are Queen's Park with 10 wins. And then our opponents from Sunday, Hearts with 8. So it'll be quite some distance. Either there's going to be a resurgent Queen's Park, or Hearts are going to have a massive turnaround in their fortunes for any team to catch us while the three of us are still alive. So we thought we'd talk about our cup final memories on this. So Saint, you marginally picked me at the post as the oldest on here. So what was your first cup final memory, and what was your first cup final that you attended?
First cup final memory is 1972 when Dixie Dean scored a hat-trick against Hibs. I can remember being in Govan and playing football around the back court, and one of the guys had a wee transistor radio, one of the wee toty thing we used to have in the old days, and we could hear the commentary for Hampden. It's interesting to note actually that in the modern age, the cup finals weren't shown live on TV until 1977. The English games were always live in England, but for some reason Scottish cup finals were never live until 77. So in the years before that, if you didn't get to go to the game, then you didn't get to see it live. So 72 is the first one I remember. The first one I was at was 74 when I was 8. My dad took me, and we were in the Old North Stand at Hampden, which was an old wooden structure. And it was fantastic for an atmosphere because, you know, on a big occasion, everybody singing and stamping their feet. This old wooden structure used to vibrate. And it was quite a good view of the pitch as well. So, and I don't remember a great deal about the actual game. I think Celtic won quite comfortably in the end. And certainly you can see the goals on YouTube. But, you know, when you're 8 years old, getting taken to a cup final and you win, it was quite an exciting day.
That old stand above the north enclosure, it's only now, as a grown-up, that I think back, no wonder they get rid of it, because it was not, I don't think it was very safe, perched up there. My only real memory of it was going to, I don't even remember the game, it was some, you'll remember better than me, Saint, it was some cup, midweek cup game, probably must have been a League Cup semi or something like that, against Dundee. So it would have been about 73, 74, 75, around then, because the thing, I don't remember the game. I remember getting home and my dad saying, that's the last time I'm taking him to a night game for a while, because I fell asleep. I arrived at the game, fell asleep, and then had to get carried home. So yeah, that's my sort of only real memory of that enclosure stand. Anthony, we'll go through cup finals in order, but what was your first cup final memory?
The first one I remember is specifically 88, and it was a big family wedding, big Glasgow family wedding booked on that day. And it was one of those stories where, you know, months in advance, you know, when my Aunt Patricia announces, oh, I'm getting married on Saturday X, every male in the family's like, that'll be the double, or, you know, that's the centenary season cup final. You know, this is a terrible idea. So you end up with this wedding where every man there is just like their mind is elsewhere. And I distinctly remember, I don't remember the mass, but I remember getting to the hotel and there being a TV no bigger than a laptop in some side room, and every man there at this big wedding crammed into this room, and me being one of the little kids at the front, you know. And obviously it sets up with McAvenny scoring 2 and making a great wedding, which could have gone spectacularly the other way, but was never going to.
And the first one you went to?
I've only been to one Scottish Cup final, picked a doozy. We saw the Huns win a treble in 99.
Hey, it's a good job you're not going tomorrow then.
No, I'm never going back.
Right, so we'll start in the chronological order of our lifetimes, Saint. And so you picked up the first one that you went to was Dundee United. We beat them 3-0. The next cup final after that, do you have much memory? This was Big Billy's last game for Celtic. We beat Airdrie 3-1. Do you have much memory of that one, Saint?
I do remember that one, but obviously a year older, so you're more into the swing of things when you're 9. And what I remember is I was quite disappointed because that was the first time my dad had took me to Hampden and we weren't in the stand. So we were in the middle of the Celtic end, massive crowd, and I couldn't see a thing. So I had to perch on top of this big railing, and it was fairly uncomfortable. And I remember when Celtic went up to get the cup, and my dad put me up on his shoulders, and the fans were singing "You'll Never Walk Alone" in this big Hampden Bowl. And it was just a magnificent sight that's always stayed with me ever since then. And another thing I remember about that day is Celtic were going through a poor run of form. That was the season that we blew 10 in a row. And towards the end of the season, we really went off the boil. So much so that some newspapers had actually picked up that Airdrie were marginal favourites to win that game. It sounds crazy when you think the Celtic team had McNeil, Kenny Dalglish, Danny McGrain, Bobby Lennox. These guys were legends. But it was viewed as being a very tough game for Celtic, and yet they actually won it quite comfortably by 3-1. And Paul Wilson deserves a lot of credit that day because his mother had died in the lead up to the cup final, and Jock Stein had left the choice to him whether he played or not. And I think Paul showed a lot of courage that day by turning out, not just turning out, but scoring 2 goals that were the platform of the 3-1 victory. So that's a favourite day. And I also remember at night time discovering that Billy had retired, because before the game the fans weren't told, it was only the players who knew. And I remember at night watched the highlights on TV in the house, and my dad and my uncles were devastated because they absolutely adored Billy McNeil, and there was a feeling of great poignancy that this was. Would he just be remembered for winning the cup? It would be remembered for Billy's last game.
You mentioned the big bowl of Hampden and the terrace, and I like you, my dad used to take us to go to the stand. Control it. I think he thought controlling 3 boys was easier in a seated area than in terracing. And a bit like you, I went to, just digressing from cup finals for a minute, I went to the Celtic Notts Forest game, and I didn't see a single bit of the game because you couldn't get tickets for the stand, and we were in the Rangers end actually at Celtic Park, and I saw nothing of that game. I would have been 11, 12 at the time. I saw nothing in the game because you're too small half the time. But the other thing about the big bowl of Hampden, even when I was in the stand, but more so when I was in the Celtic end, I had no idea how people knew that the cup was being lifted, because I could see bugger all. I could never see it. To be able to see that somebody miles away in the stand was lifting the cup, which is one thing I remember from sort of 80s cup finals of being in the Celtic end. But I'll go into the next game that we participated in, and it's the first one that I can remember. Again, watched it on the telly. So Saint, the 77 cup final, Andy Lynch penalty.
I wasn't there that day. My dad never took me, and in later years he never told me why. I think it's one of these ones that he may have chosen to go for a day and a drink rather than take his boy to the final, because I had been going to Celtic Rangers games up to that point, and I just have no recollection to the reason why I didn't get to go that day. But what I do remember is my uncle had a colour TV, and they were Rangers supporters. So I sat in my uncle's house with my cousins who were Rangers supporters, watching that game, and it was great because we won. And the other thing that I remember is I did a podcast with Joe Craig. Everybody remembers Andy Lynn scored the winning goal, but Joe Craig missed 2 really chances late in the game, which always stick in my mind. The first one is he was put through in goal. He did everything right. He drew the goalkeeper, he slipped it by the goalie, and it went past the post inches. And then the second goal, Danny McGrain at his best, cut the ball back for the byline. Paul Wilson miskicked it in the 6-yard box, and it fell to Joe, and he sort of fell over as he hit the ball, and the Rangers defender cleared it off the line. And the reason why I'm raising that is the last attack of the game, Rangers hit the bar, and it gave me the fright of my life because they weren't really in the game. But it was a guy called Chris Robertson, who's John Robertson of Hearts' big brother. He didn't really have a great career, Chris Robertson. He faded away. But that could have been his claim to fame. If he'd have scored the equaliser that day and that game had went to replay, then Joe Craig would really have been in the bad books, missing 2 chances. But as it happens, everybody just remembers Andy Lynch's penalty.
So from the 77 Cup final, we didn't feature again in a cup final until one of the more famous ones of the last 50 years. But in the intervening period, there was perhaps a trilogy of the 3 most boring Scottish Cup finals, and they were in the one season. And that was Rangers against Hibs in 78, this 1979 Scottish Cup final. They were... my memory of that was I was fortunate. In 79, we lived in West Kilbride, and if you put the portable telly upstairs in the toilet, you could pick up Northern Irish TV, and we watched the Man United Arsenal 3, Man United 2 English FA Cup final, one of the most dramatic ever. Meanwhile in Scotland, there was Rangers 0, Hibs 0. The replay was Rangers 0, Hibs 0. And then the replay of that ended up actually being a goal fest of Rangers 3, Hibs 2. But any memories of that boring triple fest?
Yeah, the Rangers Hibs at least was live in the telly for us in Scotland. So at least we got to watch that. And it was days before the 4-2 game, the famous 4-2 game. And I remember my dad turning around at me and saying, see if we don't beat them. He says, they're rotten. Because you didn't get to see teams in the flesh in those days. You only saw the highlights, which tended to make teams look better than they actually were. And I remember my dad turning around and going, there's nothing to fear here. But I'm actually quite jealous of it, Harry, because that Arsenal Man United game when we saw the highlights at night, that was fantastic. It was a great game. The finish was electric. Man United came for 2-0 down to get it to 2 each, I think, in the 89th minute. And Arsenal took centre and literally it went up the park and scored the winning goal. Alan Sunderland, that was the guy's name.
Alan Sunderland with a cross that Gary Bailey flapped at, and Alan Sunderland came in behind, and players were just collapsing all over the park, completely knackered. Because I think it was grey. My memory is it was grey at Hampden for the Scottish Cup final, but it was gloriously sunny and roasting down at Wembley. And so immediately following that is one of the most famous cup finals that we're still feeling the resonance of now. The 1980 Cup final took place closer to the Second World War than it is to today. Yet we are still setting the behaviour and drink rules at Scottish football because of what happened in that event at the Cup final. So I'll bring you in now, Anthony. Although you went around, you'll have seen the pictures of the 1980 Cup final. Would you have been on the pitch?
No, not at all. Like I say, well, what was the result? Sorry,
Celtic won 1-0 with.
Right.
It was a shot. It was a typical Trundler shot from Danny McGrain, which Jos McCluskey sort of flicked, and Peter McCloy then did his brilliant. I've asked my mate who's a Rangers fan. I've only ever seen film of Peter McCloy looking like a diddy. And I've asked my mate who's a Rangers fan, did Peter McCloy had a career that lasted from the cup before the Cup Winners' Cup final through into the mid-80s. Yet I do not recall Peter McCloy making us. I think Barkas has made more saves than I've ever seen Peter McCloy make. You know, but he says that McCloy had some great games. I don't know. I just remember McCloy looks like a diddy because he looks like an old man falling over in slow motion as the ball then goes in the opposite direction with a flick from Jos McCluskey. After, as I say, Trundle a shot from Danny McGrain. The other thing I remember about that is my brother had a digital watch with a metal strap, and watching it on the telly, he jumps up and his strap had a wee bit hanging out and cut all down my arm as he jumped up. That's the other vivid thing I remember about that cup final. So yes, you wouldn't have been on the pitch, Anthony.
No. I'm trying to think times when I was in the stadium where something like that happened. When we won the league in '98, I wasn't at the game, but I managed to get into the stadium. And even then, I was just glad to be in the building, so I didn't feel the need to run in the park. Like I think my sisters did, but I never did.
Saint, your memories of the famous '80 Cup final, was your dad there?
No, I didn't get to go in 1980. My dad was working in Camel Laird Shipbuilders in Liverpool for 6 months, and he only come back maybe once every 3 weeks. And to my disappointment, he didn't come back that weekend. So I was 14 at the time. I begged my mother to let me go, and she wouldn't let me go. And in hindsight, that was actually the best decision, because the amount of bottles that flew that day, the stuff in the park, I wasn't the kind of guy that age who would have ran in the park, but I might have got caught up in events. You never know these things. But apparently, even outside and travelling home, it was absolute bedlam. And I know that, as you said there, it's closer to the border than where it is to now. But it was probably a watershed in Scottish football history, because that day was coming. If you ever went to a Celtic Rangers game up to that point, the potential was always there for extreme violence, drunkenness, misbehaviour at a level that's totally off the scale to anything that we see these days. It's actually quite hard to describe to people. The intimidating atmosphere, even getting through the city centre in a car, in a bus, walking, you were taking your life in your hands at times. You know, that the number of arrests in the ground were huge, and the number of arrests outside the ground were even more in those days. So it was probably, in some ways, it launched a boil, because it brought it to a head that the authorities had to take action, and they were correct to take the action that they did at that time. But the actual final itself, it's frustrating, because if it finished 0-0 at full time, that game could have been 3 each. It was a fantastic game. I mean, there was 2 teams that went for broke from the very beginning. And if you ever get a chance to see the highlights on YouTube, it's a terrific game. And again, going back to a podcast I did with Mike Conroy just during the summer there, anybody who remembers that final will recall the last action of the game. It was a big high punt into Peter Latchford. And Mike Conroy says, I was underneath that ball and I'm waiting for the shout for keeper. And the shout never came, and Mike said, I'm going to need to go for this. It was a split-second thing. But as Mike Latchford clambered over the top of him and grabbed it, he's put his arms round Conroy, so he's still got the ball. Mike Conroy's got his arms up and he says, I was terrified that my arm was going to brush against the ball and the referee would give a penalty. He says, all happened in the space of 2 seconds. But at the time, it was really, he was absolutely terrified. But happily, they managed to disentangle themselves, and the referee blew the whistle at that very minute. Well, Latchford still with the ball in his hands.
So if we then move forward into the 80s, and this was my first attending at Cup finals. We went in succession. Aberdeen had beaten Rangers, won the 81 Cup final again after replay against Dundee United. And this was the period when Aberdeen and Dundee United started to be powerhouses in Scottish and European football. Aberdeen won the 82, the 83 and the 84 Cup final. 82 and 83 against Rangers. 84 against us, 2-1. And then we beat Dundee United 85 in the 100th anniversary of the Scottish Cup final. So what's your memory of those scenes? One of my memories about it is certainly the 83-84, the 84 Cup final was at the time when Glasgow was getting done up. If you remember, people listening to this might remember, the tenements were black. And one of the things I remember, so my brother and I got the train to Mount Florida, and the way that they send us round, we came out at the Celtic end and then had to go all the way, because we couldn't go straight along Somerville Drive because we'd have gone past the Aberdeen fans, but we wouldn't have done because they were waiting in the ground to see their team get the cup. So they sent us all the way round the back, so that by the time we actually got bound behind the Rangers end along Cathcart Road, to get to Mount Florida Station. The Aberdeen fans were all coming out. And it was just rubble and pipes because there was scaffolding everywhere. And I remember thinking to myself, because Aberdeen at the time had the casuals, I remember thinking to myself, if you wanted to have an arena that was perfect for violence, they'd left all the toolkit out because there was metal pipes lying everywhere. There was stone and rubble lying everywhere. Turn the corner and Aberdeen casuals were standing there with bits of scaffolding and rocks and stuff, ready to get any Celtic fans coming. So that's my memory of the losing cup final. Plus, I remember it was pissing down and you're in the Celtic end getting wet. So that's the losing one. What's your memory of those two? The losing one and then obviously beating Dundee United 2-1 85 cup final.
The losing one, I will never forgive Pat Bonner for selling his jerseys that day, because we were down to 10 men when Roy Aitken get sent off fairly early in the game. Murdo McLeod went to sweeper and was tremendous. Willie McStay was actually centre half that day because Tom McAdam had been suspended, I think. So Aberdeen were hot favourites, fantastic team. Miller McLeish, Rhys Racken, Mark McGee, fantastic players, fantastic team. And we were probably, and in fact, see when lockdown started, BBC showed that game, extended highlights, probably about April, May, and on Friday nights they were showing old classic games, and it showed you that. And what it brought back to me was how well Celtic played, and with 10 men coming back for 1-0 down, getting an equaliser, and then Bonner across to it wasn't even the back post, it was like the penalty spot, and he came flying it like Superman, nowhere near it. The ball drops to Mark McGee, and Mark McGee shoots it into an empty net where Bonner should be. So
you just described half the goals I remember us losing to Aberdeen with Pat Bonner in goals.
Yeah. It really brought it back. It was a recollection of how bad it wasn't just a mistake, it was an absolute blunder. So a year to a happier memory, Dundee United are probably at their peak at this time as well, with Sturrock, Neri and Hegarty. You know, they were probably it was evens going into that cup final because we had a good team as well. And there's two things that stick in my mind. I'll mention them quickly. Number one is for 75 minutes we never kicked a ball until Davy Hay made the bravest substitution I've ever saw when he brought off Paul McStay and sent on Pierce O'Leary. And at that time we thought he'd lost the plot. And really what he did is he put O'Leary to centre half to allow Big Roy to move into midfield. And for that moment forward, Roy Aitken won the cup final for Celtic. He didn't score the goals, but his presence driving the team forward, and it got the crowd going as well. And there was a massive crowd there that day. And the two goals were really memorable as well. It was. We went from 75 minutes of not having a shot and goal. In the last 15 minutes, we could have won 4-1. But just to digress slightly, I'm actually getting confused with 88. I'll tell you a wee story about 88 when we come to that. So 85, it's really the last 15 minutes that still gives me goosebumps thinking about it, because it was just unbelievable, the change in fortunes from one substitution. Fantastic.
So that's the 85 cup final. Aberdeen won again in 86 and Mirren in 87, quite a big thing. Ian Ferguson scoring for something. And then the 88 cup final, centenary season. One thing we should mention in the 85 cup final is the free kick. Your man, your favourite Saint, Davy Provin's free kick.
Mm-hmm.
The thing about actually, I was going to say, the thing about that for lots was, even though we were there, my memory of that free kick is now ingrained in my brain from Archie McPherson's commentary.
Yeah. Well, what I was going to say is, I did a podcast with Archie and I was really deflated because I said to him, you know, you're responsible for probably one of the most iconic bits of commentary ever. But I think it went along the lines of, there's only been 2 goals scored directly from a free kick in a Scottish Cup final. Is this a piece of history? And Provan puts the ball into the net and Archie shouts, it is. Now, that was almost like choreographed, and although it was spontaneous, and Archie couldn't remember that.
I think actually it was never before. No goal. I think nobody had ever scored direct from a free kick in a cup final was the thing. Is this a piece of history? It is.
Yeah. But the disappointment was that he couldn't. I thought he'd have been wearing that like a badge of honour because it was a superb bit of commentary.
It was because he finishes his sentence. Is this a piece of history?
Mm-hmm.
Provan hits it, goes in the top corner. It is. It's almost as if he knew it was going to happen and just paused just for that bit. So on to the 88 Cup final. Anthony, this is your first memory of it. So I'll let you take it away. Do you remember much of the game if you were at the wedding?
I do remember it because I guess it's one that, you remember at the time and then you see the videos down the years. I remember being aware that Kevin Gallagher scoring for United, and he was one of these, I think he was he not the grandson or the son of a Celtic player?
Patsy Gallagher. Yeah.
Patsy Gallagher. So he's one of these guys that my dad would always have been, we should sign him. He's a good player and he's of the club's DNA. So it was always, he's a good player. And he actually went down to England and won a championship, was a solid pro. But I remember them taking the lead, and obviously at that wedding I was at the mood, taking a turn for the worse. But we know it's going to come. I think in the semi-final we'd won it late against the Hearts, if I'm not mistaken. Mm-hmm. So there was that kind of belief that we're going to do this, and ultimately McAvenny chipped in with his 2 goals, and it was always going to be what it was.
The big shock scene before that game was that Alan McKnight played Pat. There was no advance notice that Pat Bonner was going to be injured.
No, that's true. Alan McKnight had played a few games that season. He'd actually done relatively well in big games, particularly against Rangers. So even though he was in goals, there wasn't a great concern because he'd been playing in high-profile games. He played in European games. He'd played in Old Firm games up to that point. But I have to tell you a wee story here. I get thrown out of that cup final, and what happened was, if people who remember the terracing at Hampden, there was a big fence which separated the Celtic end for the enclosure. Now I was in the enclosure with my mate Alan Stewart. If you're watching, Alan, hello. And my dad was in the Celtic end. And just as the game kicked off, I saw my dad and I said, wait till half time and me and Alan will scale the fence and we'll watch the second half together. Now, this big mesh fence was about 20 foot high and I don't like heights. So Alan scaled it, no problem. But it took me a wee bit to scale it. And there's a great word in Glaswegian slang, it's dreepy. I did a dreepy for the fence. And I fell slightly and my trousers were dusted and I was right in my trousers. And all I saw was a pair of Doc Martens and I looked up and it was a big post. And he says, fence jumper. And he grabs my arm up the back and he marches me away. Now, neither Alan or my dad can see this. But all I can think at the time is, how am I going to explain this to my ma? What happens if I get to jail? I was terrified, right? I'd never been in trouble with the police in my life. So as it happens, I get thrown out. I just get thrown into outside. And there was a lot of building work at Hampden at the Celtic end at the time. And there was this big mesh fence. And there was a wee boy about 12, 13 who managed to get the fence up off the ground for about a foot, maybe about that much. And he said to me, going to pull that up. And I managed to get it out a wee bit more. And the wee fella he crawled through. And I said to him, listen, put your leg through there, son, and see if you can just keep that fence from falling down, this sort of mesh. And I crawled under, I got covered in dirt, and I scraped all my arms in this mesh fence. And I get back in there again. And by this time, Dundee United were 1-up. I heard the roar, I knew Dundee United had scored. And I ran down the Celtic end steps, and I got my dad and I got Alan. And that policeman was still standing there next to that fence. So we moved in a wee bit for that part into the main swell of the crowd. And Celtic scored 2 goals to win 2-1. So if you're asking me about a remarkable story in life, that's my remarkable story, that I get back in time to see the two winning goals.
The thing about that in the centenary season, and you mentioned it, Anthony, about the score in the last couple of minutes against Hearts in the semi. I still am amazed when I look back about how late on in the game it was that we first equalised and then scored. Because at no point, my memory is at no point watching that game did I think we were not going to win. And not even need extra time, even though we didn't get the winner until the 90th minute. Because the whole season had been winning in adversity and winning it. And the thing that was magic about, I'd just turned 18, right? And the thing that was magic about both the 88 and the 89 Cup final, this is the plus side of the Celtic end having no roof. When you went into town that night, it was dead easy to spot the Celtic fans in town because we had bright red Belisha beacon faces from having been in the uncovered terrace. And although there was a sizable amount of Celtic fans from memory in the Dundee United end, in the Rangers end, that day as well. So that was that 89 cup final. Anthony, do you remember much about the 89 cup final? The famous we knock it out for a throw-in and take the throw-in.
It's a great tactic, you know. My dad was a huge Joe Miller fan, and I think Joe Miller had been, you know, a key player in several cup finals in a row. You know, he played quite well, you know, including 88, 89 and 90, you know, the one we lose on penalties. So, yeah, my dad was always chuffed that Joe Miller got the goal. I think he was always a guy that said, you know, Joe Miller should play through the middle. I don't know how true that is. I don't know enough about him. But
he played through the middle for Aberdeen. When he broke into the Aberdeen team, he was playing through the middle. We signed him and stuck him on the wing. Bit like Simon Donnelly broke through into the Celtic team through the middle and we stuck him on the wing. So, yeah, on that occasion, it's obviously wee Joe that sneaks in for the crap back pass and scores a winner cup final. And it's one of the great Celtic celebrations as he runs off blowing kisses to the Rangers end. You know, there's nothing better than that. You know, he wouldn't trade a place to be in that position. No, saying for me, the biggest way you know that referees give more decisions to Rangers than us, if you ever whinge about bad decisions against us, Rangers fans will throw up the 89 Cup final. The very fact that they're going back 31 years to throw up a bad refereeing decision illustrates that they don't get many of them. So 89 Cup final, with your memory of that, you managed to stay in the ground, Saint?
I managed to. I didn't get thrown out that day. The two memories I've got is, number one, it was a terrible game of football. The shot, apart from the goal, there was nothing in it. And we were hanging on grimly in the last 10, 15 minutes because they were hitting us with everything. The other memory as well is to take on what you were saying there about the hot weather. It was excruciatingly hot that day. It wasn't just warm. It must have been about 80 degrees. And I was next to my dad, and I actually made an agreement with my dad. He as you can see here, our family, there's not a lot of hair, and he was really feeling the effects of the sun. So I made an agreement with my dad that if Rangers equalised and it went to injury time, we were going to get back to the bus because he was really, I think he would have fainted. And that night that he was unwell, and it was sunstroke. And it sounds crazy to think that you can, you associate sunstroke with going on holiday to warm climates. But honestly, that day for 2 hours standing in an open terrace and in the sun, that my dad get sunstroke that day. So,
my mate was playing for Clyde in Scotland under 18s at the time. So again, if people want to know where cup final tickets go, this was my first introduction of where cup final tickets go. I got a ticket for the 89 cup final because my mate was playing for Clyde in Scotland at the time, and every club gets an allocation of tickets. And so, I can't remember who was Clyde manager at the time. Anyway, he then said, basically, he knew Michael. Michael was really into football. So he was more he just wanted the best team to always win a game of football. So he said, there you go, Michael. There's your cup final tickets. They're obviously for the Celtic end, simply by default of the fact Michael was a Catholic. He got Celtic end tickets. And so I got one because he wasn't that fussed about going and knew that it mattered.
Listen, I can add on to that. There was a guy in front of us with a red jumper, and I thought at the time, that's an unusual colour for a Celtic fan to wear at a cup final. Everybody's covered in yellows and whites and greens of all shade. And this guy had and I got to the stage, actually walked a couple of steps down because he had an emblem on the red jumper. I thought at first it was Man United, which would be, totally acceptable. It was Dunfermline. This guy was there with this red jumper with DAFC, and I said to him, I said, how are you doing? I said, look, what brings you here? And he said, I've always wanted to see a Celtic Rangers Cup final, and I work for Dunfermline Football Club, and I got a ticket. And as you were saying there, where did the tickets go?
So that's where they go. The other thing I remember about that final, was it that final that with about 2 minutes to go, this is in the days before they would add on specific injury time lasted a minute, 30 seconds. If the referee didn't blow within a minute of 90 minutes, you were thinking he was at it back in those days. Well, we get a free kick down near the corner flag, and Roy Aitken just blew us the free kick straight out of the park into the back of the Celtic end. And I always remember thinking, he didn't even try and get a deflection off the Rangers player who was there that might have got us a corner. He just ran and bloated it straight up.
But I think he hits it into the Celtic end, doesn't he? So he knows, all right, someone's going to catch it, and then it's going to, it's not coming out of there anytime soon. Yeah. It was masterful. I watched it again this morning.
So after the 89 Cup final, we have the penalty defeat to Aberdeen. Charlie Nick playing for Aberdeen. Saint, what's your memory of that one? That's really at the start of our, we already know we're in decline, but it's really at the start of the decline with the barren years of trophies and everything that happened in the middle. So what's your memory of that Cup final, Saint?
It was another poor game, and it was a game I remember being at where I thought, we're never scoring here. We didn't have any inspiration, we didn't have any particular anybody who could grab the game by the scruff of the neck. And when it went to penalties, it was just a lottery. And I always felt sorry for Rogan, because if Dovcik had scored, then Rogan would never have been the villain. So it wasn't a great day, and as you said there, it probably signified the start of the barren years.
The worst thing about penalty kicks when they get beyond the 5 is the people who are then responsible for a team losing or whatever are the players who least want to take a penalty. Because the very fact that you are the 9th, 10th or 11th player to take a penalty means you didn't want to take one. You know you're not the best. Anyway, I'll quickly speed through so we can catch up with the Cup finals. Good, 15 minutes left. So the big one, Anthony, is the 95 Cup final. It ended the barren period. What's your memory of that one?
I remember it being at a mate's house and having it on the TV and watching it, and it's interesting to look back at now when you look at the list. It's the last Celtic Scottish Cup final, maybe last Scottish Cup final, where the list of players all have saltires next to their name.
Yeah.
It's like we would have met UEFA's 3 foreigners criteria in that final with Rudy Vata, Pat Bonner and Pierre, and the rest is all Scottish. So it's an interesting watch to see, because that's not the case and won't be again, unlikely. But yeah, to see a team of Mark McNally's, Simon Donnelly's, Phil O'Donnell's, John Collins, all Scots, playing in a not a particularly good game, a nice goal, a brilliant ball in by Tosh McKinlay. I've very, very fond memories of Tosh McKinlay. But yeah, a goal was all we needed, and it was a big celebration afterwards.
The poorly seated Hampden, Saint, with only 36,000 people there.
What I remember about that is the difficulty in getting tickets, because this was seen as Celtic coming back to the fore, and there was a mad scramble for tickets. The game, I think, as Anthony's alluded to there, was a poor game of football, but with a great goal. I mean, Van Hooydonk's header was a wonderful sight on the day, and Peter Grant, in the last couple of minutes, had a great saving tackle to stop an Airdrie player who probably would have scored. So that's the two. That was a game summed up.
Do you know the 95 Cup final and Seville final are the 2 occasions in my life when I've been at a game and thought to myself, I'm struggling to breathe with nervous tension here. How must the players be feeling if I'm feeling like that?
At the end of the game, all we felt was relief. There wasn't any great joy in it. I think it was just pure relief.
Yeah. I remember I was in the seated area, as it was at the front of the Celtic end. Next Cup final is yours, Anthony. Hey. It's your Jinx Cup final. We lost 1-0 to Rangers in '99.
It's a really strange one, because you name any Celtic game in the last 25 years that we lost, I'll have someone to blame. I'll say, it was the ref's fault. It was Brian O'Neill's fault. It was, George Alberts did something spectacular. I left Hampden that day and did not think a moment about it until this morning when I knew we were doing this. Do you know what I mean? I've just decompartmentalised that game. That didn't happen. So I went to watch the highlights of it this morning. Really weird to watch back. One, you're not going to win a cup final with Reggie Blinker on the team. Lesson learned. 2, there's a sort of flappy-haired Moravchik playing, which is, I don't really remember that, but yeah. And 3, ultimately, Johnny Gould had a good game. Johnny Gould made some saves. I have no real memories of Johnny Gould being good other than that St Johnstone save he made at the start of his career. I thought that bought him a couple of years. But he actually had a decent game in that cup final, so he was unlucky to be in the losing team.
Saint, any memories of it?
Team selection that day, I think Dr. Joe got it wrong. Birchall had played a lot of games in the lead up to that cup final and scored a few goals. And he played Tommy Johnson, and I don't even think Birchall was in the bench.
Birchall wasn't in the bench. Johnson was in the bench, and Birchall didn't even get in the squad.
Yeah. So to me, that was a bad one because Birchall was on fire at the time. As Anthony said there, Lubo was just coming back from injury. He wasn't 100%. We took a gamble, it didn't work. And then another thing that was there was a Paul Lambert shot near the end which struck a Rangers player, and we claimed for a penalty. And at the time, I was convinced it was a penalty, but having seen the TV footage in later years, nah. Just a poor performance.
Yeah, but that was all redeemed shortly after in the wonderful Martin O'Neill era, and we won a treble in 2001. We beat Hibs 3-0. Saint?
That's one of my happiest days. It was one of those games where you just knew Celtic were going to win, and I don't say that very often because I'm normally quite apprehensive before big games, but I just felt the momentum at the time that we had was wonderful. Larsson was on fire. We were almost unbeatable at that time. Another thing as well that sticks in my mind is Bobby Murdoch had died in the days leading up to the cup final, so there was a wee bit of a bittersweet thing because he was the first of the Lisbon Lions to pass away. And I just remember it being such a happy occasion. And also, that was the first time that I could remember a Celtic team winning a treble. So that made it a particularly affectionate day.
Because we've got so many Celtic wins coming up, I'm going to just sort of try and batter through it in the 10, 12 minutes we've got left. So I'm going to jump then, I'm going to bypass losing 3-2 to Rangers in the last minute in 2002. 2004, Anthony Murray, we beat Dunfermline 3-1.
Typical Celtic, we give them a stupid lead, but it's a cup final, so we come back and win it brilliantly. And Larsson's last competitive game, I guess. Wearing that, I quite like that green away strip we wore, but it was just the most Larsson moment of his career, wasn't it? Give him half a chance when you think he's not having a good game. Half a chance, buries one. Second chance, a chance that a good striker should finish, but he just so composed, so cool, just gives the keeper the eyes and just slots it in the far corner. And then Petrov, scores a nice finish as well. So, that was for a double, was it? Yeah, it would have been. Yeah. And, big farewell. Larsson goes out like the king he was.
So, Saint, next one is 05 season, a bit bittersweet. I mean, I just remember that whole week being a downer week. We beat Dundee United 1-0 in a bit of a nothing final, is my memory of it.
It's a toss-up between what was the worst cup final, the 2005 or the 2007. There were dreadful games of football, and the only thing you can say is that we won it. And it's much better to win a bad final than lose a bad final. The 2005 one probably best remembered for Chris Sutton's penalty where he lost his footing, and he literally fell over the ball and sent the ball over the bar.
His planting foot goes down, and as he's about to hit it, it goes away. And it's one of those things where your split-second thoughts are, that's unfair, he should get to take it again.
But it was a brutal day in terms of weather. It was like a December day. It certainly wasn't Mayweather.
And it was Martin O'Neill's last day. It's actually, it's what got me where we are just now, because it was in the papers in the May that Martin was leaving. But through coincidence, I knew two people. One person who knew Robertson, the other one who knew Steve Walford. And in the end of January, they were not football fans. Independently, they'd said to me, "Oh, I see your manager's leaving in the summer," and it's because Walford had told his mate and Robertson had told his mate that they were selling the house because they were leaving. And I remember contacting Eddie Pearson, as he was at the time, Glenn Tim, who did the E-Tim's rumour mill. And I remember contacting him and saying, Martin O'Neill, this was in first week in February, Martin O'Neill's leaving in the summer. and that was on the E-Terms Rumour Mill, and that got me to where we are today.
That was your first scoop.
That was my first scoop, yes. That was my first scoop. So 2007 Cup Final, Dunfermline 1-0, Anthony Murray.
I was looking at obviously we're sharing this platform for this today, and I was looking at the rules that we have to follow, certain taboos that we're not allowed to touch upon. And on that list of taboos is humiliation and violation of human dignity. So at that point, we cannot discuss Lennon's substitution for Gary Caldwell. Because it doesn't get worse than that. I didn't realise how dramatic it was until watching it back this morning. Lennon storms down the tunnel. He's in a proper cream puff. Quite interesting.
I remember people around me being quite annoyed that I thought it showed Strachan's lack of sentimentality. Although I did wonder if Strachan was making the substitution to allow Lennon to get an individual applaud off the park. But I remember people around me going nuts, saying it summed up Strachan to them, that he wasn't giving dignity to this Celtic man by allowing him to play the full 90 minutes. We might see something similar this Sunday. Who knows? Mm-hmm. So next one, Saint, is after rattle through because a couple of Rangers victories. That was before they went, when they still traded. Next one is 2011 against Motherwell, Cup Final, Saint.
Horrible pissing wet day. Motherwell should have had a stonewall penalty when Majstorovic handled the ball in the penalty area at nothing each. So in terms of getting a benefit that they did that day. And two cracking goals. Key's goal was wonderful. Charlie Magoo's free kick was a peach. And it was one of the better performances, but we did get away with a penalty shout. It could have been different.
So we've got the 2013 Cup Final 3-0 against Hibs. Anthony?
Absolutely brilliant. Really nice kit. Black away strip. I think the nicest Celtic away strip there ever was. Gary Hooper scores two wonderful first half goals, and where he strikes it, he headers one, volleys the other, and he basically lands on John Beaton's toes, because John Beaton's like the fourth or fifth official, and he lands right on him. It's absolutely wonderful. Foster makes a great save at 0-0. Ledley scores a goal, and interesting of note, one of two Scottish Cup finals where Anthony Stokes is man of the match. I was a big fan of Anthony Stokes. He was brilliant for us that day, and a couple of years later he came back in a Hibs shirt to win another one, and we all enjoyed that one as well.
Well, I'm going to touch on
the only thing about that.
Yeah.
No, I just want to say the only thing about that game is I wasn't aware of this. That was played on a Sunday. I don't remember that. I just automatically thought it was a Saturday. Something to do with the Champions League final. I can't remember why.
That's right. Yeah, it's to do with Champions League final. It was when when they first moved Champions League. I think that was when they first moved Champions League final to the Saturday night. And the Scottish FA hadn't obviously in their usual organised fashion hadn't really noted that, and we weren't allowed to do it. I'm going to briefly touch the 2015 Scottish Cup final. We should have won a treble that season. Ronnie Dyler would have won a treble as Celtic manager. If a guy who's still a referee, still official, who's the behind the goals guy, had remember the handball of Inverness in the cup semi final where he couldn't see it from 3 feet.
No, but you've also got the linesman and the referee and the guy behind the goal. Between the three of them, you think one of them would have seen that?
Well, the thing about it is, I was in the main stand, the south stand at Hampden, but on the bend as it goes into the Celtic end, so on that corner, so I'm 110 yards away. I could see it was a handball from there. Every official in the park could have seen it was a handball, but they're Huns. Yeah. So then we're on to the invincible season, 2017, Saint. So Tom Rogic, last minute winner. Aberdeen take the lead. We win the treble. Your memories on that?
Very, very quickly. I had health issues at the time. I was in hospital for an operation, and probably I mixed the dates up, but I ended up being in Malta that weekend. And I'm so happy that I was, because it was a wonderful memory, in a family sense. So I would love to have been there at Hampden. But the experience and my father-in-law, who's passed away now, was with me that day, and my son, Michael, was only about 12 or 13 at the time. But it's a brilliant personal memory in Malta, in the sunshine, and a brilliant sunny day. And when Tom Rogic scored that goal, was just, everybody remembers it. Everybody's got their own favourite memory. It's hard to describe how good it was.
Anthony, your memory of it?
I'd gone through an Irish pub in Vienna, which wasn't particularly well populated with Tims, but there was enough of us to generate some kind of small atmosphere. And yeah, it's as good as it gets, isn't it? Just absolutely fantastic. And we're just bouncing for days. I'd say it's similar to O'Neill's first treble. You're just on cloud nine for months,
The next one, Anthony, is the 2-0 victory over Motherwell. Second treble, the double treble. Did we ever think we'd see the likes again?
It's just so good. The fact that McGregor scores that goal, I mean, if you look back at these, you realise, Ki Sun-young's goal, Davy Provin's goal, Larsson's goals. We've scored some great cup final goals. And as good as any of them is McGregor's half volley on his wrong foot. Just, you can't do that. Yeah, it gets faster every time I watch it. It's such a good strike of a football. And Cham chips in with a second. Interesting, I noticed looking at the details of it, an 18-year-old unused substitute, David Turnbull, of Motherwell. So he's been in the stadium before, so here's hoping he turns up tomorrow to get a wee run out.
Saint, just before we cover off tomorrow's game, Saint, we beat Hearts last season, or whenever it was. I'm losing track. A season and a half ago, for an incredible, unique treble.
Treble.
Memories of that one?
The memories of that is that our Michael was on the pitch that day, but he did the presentation thing with the crests and stuff. So that for a young boy, that was a memory that will stay with him for the rest of his life. And I was quite proud that he was on the pitch. I know he didn't play, but he was part of the event, which means a great deal to us. And he's got wonderful photographs to look back. And in terms of the game, fantastic winning goal. But Edward, he runs in and goal. That's quality finishing. There's so much resting on that. And then after the event was a bit of a damp squib because I think it was a rugby on at Celtic Park, and we couldn't get back to the ground, and it was meant to be a bus parade back into the city. We went to the Merchant City. It was absolute carnage. It was bedlam, in a good way. No, I don't mean in a bad sense, but there's no way any bus could have went down Salt Market and onto the Gallagate. So that was the only disappointment in the day, but we couldn't get the celebration.
So we're just wrapping up now. As one of my Rangers supporting mates said to me the other day, you only know how disappointing it is to not be in a cup final. You only realise how much you enjoy being in a cup final until the cup final's on and there's two other teams playing in it and your team isn't winning them. Mm-hmm. And so we've got that tomorrow. It's the strangest thing, having a cup final the week before Christmas. And it's last season's cup final with this season's team. A guy who was our goalkeeper in the squad last season, in Hearts squad for this season. Anthony, what's your expectations for tomorrow? Really
interesting. I mean, they're only Hearts are, got deservedly relegated from my point of view. I know a lot of pundits say, they're a Premier League club. It's like, they kept saying that and they kept getting beat. So that's why they went down. That's how it works. So we shouldn't be fearing them. There is narratives there that are on, if you were of their persuasion, the Huns in their team, Gordon in their team, there is a story there if they were to win it. But hopefully we pick the right team and go and win it.
Saint?
I'm a wee bit worried about the team selection because I think the last two games, the changes that he's made have given us revitalised the team and energised the team. And I hope that he's not going to revert to sort and go back to the I was going to say the tried and tested, but probably the tried and failed this season. So, as Anthony said there, that Craig Gordon's got a point to prove. You've got Naismith, you've got Halliday. There's probably another couple of players in there who don't have any great desire to see Celtic winning. But it's an opportunity for Hearts to create a wee bit of history in their own right. But from our point of view, 4th consecutive treble, never been done. 4th consecutive Scottish Cup, never been done. No person has won a treble as a player and a manager. So there's so many records to be broken tomorrow if he can just go over the line. And I'm hoping that we're over this horrible period, horrible patch. And I do hope we can do it with a bit of style.
Scoreline predictions, Saint?
I'm a great believer in one more than them will do me. I'd be happy with a 1-0 win, but as I said there, that I would love us to do it with a bit of panache.
Anthony?
If he picks the right team, 3-0.
Well, I think he'll pick the right team, and I think we'll win. And I think we'll get a quadruple treble. And with that, I will say thank you very much for everybody listening. Thanks very much for listening. Don't forget, the purpose of this is to raise money. So if you can go on the links below, you'll find in the descriptions, you will see how to donate. Good luck to everybody else who's doing their podcasts. And with that, I will say St. Anthony Murray, thanks very much.
Hail, hail.
Thank you. Pleasure.